Okay, good morning. Hope everybody can hear me. Today we're going to be talking about preparing for the remote workforce and some of the new challenges that presents us as we have been experiencing that with things like COVID, but honestly, it existed well before that. And so we're going to jump in and talk about that today. If you've got questions for me, feel free to interrupt. Just go ahead and unmute and ask those while we're doing the presentation and talking through these things. If you'll put your email address in the chat box for me at the end of the presentation, I will send you an email with information that goes along with this workshop so that you can have that. And at some point too, we'll have a recording ready for you on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and watch it again. So preparing for remote work, what are we talking about? Why is this such a pressing thing today? Well, obviously COVID sort of sped up the need for this, but remote work has been around for a long time. So even before COVID. So this was information from FlexJobs back in 2019. There were already nearly 5 million people in the U.S. working remotely. Now, working remotely and working from home may not necessarily be the same thing. I mean, so many people went to work from home during COVID because they were forced to, but we already had lots and lots of industries based on a remote workforce all through the 90s and into the 2000s, especially things like sales and even some of the things that we think about in the medical industry were already remote positions. So we need to be ready for that. But when COVID hit, wow, I mean, a majority of the country had to work from home. And whether the pandemic ends today or in another year, this trend is not going away. Companies are figuring this out. Employees are figuring this out. There are some benefits to this. There's some drawbacks as well. We'll talk about some of those, but obviously that COVID advancing that has made us really address the need for it. There was obviously a surge in remote work. And when you think about that, just in the time that we had the initial few weeks of things shutting down with COVID, we saw a drastic increase in this. And people had to adapt quickly to be able to do this. Companies had to pivot. The workforce had to get the right technology in place. A lot of people had to figure out how to have a space in their homes, to do that kind of thing. And we'll talk about some of those spaces. But even prior to that, we were already seeing a growth in this, that certain industries really have figured out this works for them. And if you're going into a workforce that's in one of those industries, you've got to be ready for it. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to adapt to it. So why would an organization choose to offer that? Well, 52% of organizations surveyed said that it improved their staff retention, that people like that. And a lot of companies have figured out, obviously, there's a cost savings to this, but there are some lifestyle changes for staff when they get to live and work this way that oftentimes makes the employee experience even better. Employees like working from home or like the ability to work remotely and have that freedom. And again, even in 2019, before COVID hit, we were already seeing a shift in the appeal for the workforce to be from home. That workers were finding that their satisfaction in their job was higher when they had the freedom to do that. They felt more productive. And maybe sometimes in the workplace, we don't necessarily think that our companies would be productive without an on-site manager, without an on-site team. And again, some of this remote work is not completely remote. I mean, there are times we see a lot of hybrid situations right now where people are going into the workforce or going into remote work as a part of their week and then in the office or on site somewhere as the other part of that week. So here's some benefits when we think about the idea of working from home or working remotely. Obviously, people appreciate the fact that they don't have to commute. It saves them money. The flexible schedule and the fact they don't have to dress up, you can sort of customize this. And we were talking here in the office the other day that, it's nice to be able to, if let's say you're working from home and you're also doing a load of laundry at the same time, there's a different style of multitasking that can take place that changes the quality of life for certain folks, for certain employees. So to have a quieter space, maybe outside the office, where if you're doing some knowledge work or some creative work, that you have a better environment to do that. There's also the idea that you have more control over it often. If you're working remotely or working from home, you get to decide that. Obviously, remote work, if there's not an on-site staff or the need to have people in a building all the time, it saves the employer some cost there. But we're also seeing too, this cost being it has the ability to trickle down to the actual paycheck of the employee, that certain companies are allowing more and more remote work but with a reduced paycheck for those employees. So just keep that in mind. There are some drawbacks here. It's not going away. The future of remote work is here to stay. Most of the country has obviously embraced a lot of this, and the world has embraced a lot of this. But I thought this was a neat thing, even pre-COVID, that 2/3 of knowledge workers think that offices will disappear by 2030. Now, this is employees and different levels of staff in all kinds of countries across industries being surveyed here. But even back in 2019, most folks in the corporate world were already embracing this shift. So what do we do? How can we get to be ready for that? Well, we got to think about some of the challenges, and we're going to do that this morning as we talk through some of this. There's a life balance challenge that a lot of times folks have trouble if their home becomes their workspace. Sometimes it's hard to feel like you can ever pull away from those stress factors of work. Some of the other struggles, obviously loneliness, not being a part of a physical team when we've been a part of that for a long time. If you are already in the workforce and used to that social scene being sort of demonstrated through your work, it makes it a little tougher. A lot of times the collaboration and communication that we have has always been face-to-face. We even though we could have jumped on the telephone or been able to use a Zoom call or something like that prior to this, that most of our collaboration was done face-to-face. And when you work with a team, that's really important. There's things like time zones that affect certain teams if we're drastically remote or separated from each other. But even some simple things like staying motivated, having sort of that motivation, that drive to do quality work. Some folks say that's hard because they need the team to help them stay motivated. And then even technical issues. If you are doing this from home, finding the reliable bandwidth on your Wi-Fi may be a problem. Sometimes that's been a big problem for people during COVID. But even beyond COVID, making sure you have the right technology to be available to work remotely is a challenge and an issue for some of us. So let's talk about how we prepare for this. So obviously those first few slides, we're talking through the need for this and that this is not a new thing. And we're talking about it primarily because COVID has really advanced the need for it. But again, we were already headed in that direction. So COVID sort of accelerated that. But we need to be upfront that remote work is not for everybody. Some of us are just not wired with the soft or hard skills for remote work. And we want to be careful that we don't assume that everybody on every team can really thrive in the remote environment. And certain folks in certain industries, they know that even post-COVID, they're going to stay remote. And if you're not ready for that or haven't prepared, professionally for that, that could be a real challenge. And some of us are in industries that are going to continue to be remote for a long time, if not permanently. And if that wasn't the plan or sort of the thing that drew you into that line of work, you might have some questions to ask. But we need to be ready. And if we have to go back to remote work or continue in a remote work environment because of COVID. So how do we prepare? Well, first we need to think about how we prepare in the job search sense, that already most of our job search tools were already online. Now, obviously we do a lot of networking face-to-face, but because of tools like LinkedIn and most of your job search sites have those built-in networking features, we were already looking at a completely virtual job search for most folks. You're doing some networking, you're on the phone, you're meeting people, sure, but a lot of the job search process is already on the internet. It's happening regardless of where you are living or already working or going to school. And at the same time, along with that virtual job search, you've already had the virtual tools to do remote interviews and those kind of things. So that particular piece of it is not new, but we have really embraced that because of COVID. A lot of the technologies we use are continuing to evolve right now. Even just this past year, when the world took over using Zoom as a daily task or a daily part of their life, so much of Zoom has changed just in the year we've used it. They've added new features. There's new pieces to it, lots of new available video technologies like that have really come online because of COVID. So we want to make sure that we're prepared to use those. The experience itself, we need to prepare for the fact that the experience of being fairly physically alone all day doing our work is different from the way most of us envisioned work. And that leads to the need for a certain mindset, which are those soft skills, and then a hard set, a skill set where we can do some specific things that make us thrive or allow us to thrive in that environment. We're going to talk some too about remote collaboration and how we prepare for a culture of that. And that the fact that our new team dynamics in this may seem less relational, but there are some very strategic things we can do as individuals to set a culture in our workplace, whether we're in that lead chair or somebody on that bottom rung of the staff ladder, to make those more relational and more intentional even when we're not physically working in the same office environment or the same space. So think about a completely virtual job search for a few minutes. The primary job search tools we've already had are online. All the applications we've been doing for a long time, and even a lot of us are doing interviews over the phone well prior to COVID, or well prior to even the need for things like Zoom. I was doing phone interviews for companies 20 years ago. And so that idea is not new, but now the fact that we need to be able to really thrive in that environment means we need to master the technologies using some of those remote tools like Zoom, like GoToMeeting, some of those things, so that when we get into an interview environment, we can offer a presentation, we can share our screen, we can use all those tools and features that we know how to set those up and make that very seamless process for both us and possibly the employer who's using that. I find that some of these employers are still struggling with learning to use some of these things. But again, like anything else, there's going to be somewhat of a learning curve, but before long, the culture takes over. And so we need to master those technologies and be able to do that. We've really got to learn to network online. And I had a student this week that was trying his best to convince me that there was no reason for him to have a LinkedIn account. And he talked about working in a particular environment till he retires. This is a person who's 22 years old, in his first job, 23 years old, talking about how he's going to work there till he retires. We have no idea what's on the forefront or on the horizon for our jobs and our industries. And we'd all love to think that we're going to work in this particular place that we love till we retire. But in the event that you have a job loss or a layoff or a furlough, or your company just crashes and disappears from the job market, you need to be able to network. And because so much of networking has moved online, we've got to be able to use with beyond, not just proficiency, but with mastery, sites like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed, these recruitment sites that allow you to network. And LinkedIn is obviously the number one that we probably all can think of. This is a rite of passage and sort of an expectation for all folks in professional work now. I was listening to a podcast this week where the gentleman was talking about, this was in the finance industry, how they cannot exist without networking on LinkedIn. LinkedIn doesn't just help you find people who may be hiring. It helps you find clients. It helps you find customers. It helps you find advice and all these things that we really rely on through a network. And so again, networking is going to continue to be more and more of an online thing. But the great thing is that allows us to network with people all over the world, and not just in our local neighborhoods or our local office environments. That we can network with people literally all over the world. And that expands our horizons and gives us a lot more insight into what's going on, gives us an information source that we didn't have previously. Virtual job fairs. We had one of these yesterday here at Gardner Webb for our internship fair. And I say we had it here at Gardner Webb. We sponsored it, but it happened on the internet. It happened through Handshake, the tool we use for that, and a lot of our job search stuff. Those virtual job fairs are not going away. Companies are learning to embrace that technology. And the truth is they like it. It saves them in money. They don't have to pay for a recruiter to come to a campus to do a job fair. They can sit at their desk and do their work with virtually no expenses on travel and those kind of things. And the seamlessness that most of these technologies provide with video chat make it so easy to use. It's a no-brainer. So virtual job fairs, we need to be prepared for those. And there's lots of things that we can help you with in our office to prepare for those if you need that. But it's sort of like doing an interview, but over the software or the platform you're using. Another big thing about the virtual job fair, because we're talking about the irrelevance of location a lot of times, we're seeing more and more students be able to apply for jobs that are in places they never thought they would apply, with companies that they never thought they would apply because of proximity or geography, that they were nowhere near them. They're not planning to move to California, but they may work for a company that's based in California. And maybe they go out there twice a year or a couple of times a month for something, if they fly them out for a meeting or something, but most of that work is done completely remotely. And that has changed the job search outlook for certain candidates, because if you were in a location previously where you felt like there were limited candidates geographically, now that candidate pool may be huge because of remote work, that people from all over the country, really all over the world, as long as they have access to the right technology, could do that work remotely. So companies are changing how they search. And as folks who are in the job market, we need to be ready to show that we are available for remote work, but that we're prepared for it. The other thing we're also finding too, that even if a company is looking for, folks through the remote work world, or are starting to develop that culture, they still like to know the proximity of folks in a candidate pool. So make sure on your resume that you're still putting your location, because a lot of this remote work is hybridized work right now. So there may be the need for you to come into the office a couple of days a week or a couple of days a month, and you need to live in at least a drivable distance of that place so you can do that. So that's another issue we've seen come up with that. Throughout a virtual job fair or job search process, you need to be able to demonstrate your skills. And one of the ways we do this, think about a site like LinkedIn. LinkedIn's got this great profile builder that you can use, all free tools. You need to max that out, one, so that recruiters can find you, but when they find you, so that you can really showcase your top skills. And one of the ways sites like LinkedIn allow you to do that is through skills assessments and skills endorsements, where you can take an assessment and score a certain, and these are all free assessments, but you score a certain level on there, and LinkedIn gives you sort of this badge of credibility that says this person is highly skilled in Excel, or this person is proficiently skilled in PowerPoint, or whatever. But you can also ask for other people to endorse you in those skills, and not just technical skills, but a lot of the hard and soft skills you're going to use in any field. So that's a neat way to do that. So make sure you're tapping into that. If you've not looked at that with LinkedIn, check out our LinkedIn, our workshop on LinkedIn. It's called Maximizing LinkedIn. That's out on our YouTube page. If you need information about that, email me and I'll get you that. But another big piece of this too is just being intentional, and these technology tools allow us to stay on the radar of these companies. I mean, things like email and voicemail have been around for so long, but the fact that I can message people at a high corporate level through LinkedIn and hear back from them within just moments is a new way to communicate. And we want to be intentional to stay on the radar of recruiters and companies and places that we want to maybe aspiring to apply to or work for. And again, these tools allow us to do that. So a new forefront that really some neat things that could benefit us in that world. When you think about the top remote work industries that are out there right now, and so if you're in the job market or currently working in one of these fields, I mean, these are the places that we're seeing remote work, sort of appear strongest. So information technology, obviously, and that's everything from data management and IT to things like web development and some of the graphic design stuff that goes with that. Obviously, sales has been a remote work industry for years. I mean, you can think about even in the mid 1900s, the mid 20th century, we had the traveling salesman. That was remote work. And we don't think about it like that. This person living out of a hotel room and, tallying their sales sheets in a coffee shop or a diner. That was a totally normal thing. And we don't think about that as remote work. But now so many companies are realizing it is completely pointless to provide a physical, and especially an expensive physical office space for someone who's in sales. They can do all of it with a cell phone and a laptop. So we don't need those spaces anymore. Companies are finding they can save a ton of money by doing that. Healthcare. We're moving to remote work, and has been for years. I mean, there's always been the idea of the doctor house call visit, that sort of thing. But now what we're seeing in healthcare is the fact you don't need to go to the doctor's office to have a checkup. That can be done through video chat, and that's happened a lot. Really, COVID has drastically accelerated that. But if you're going into the healthcare industry, prepare to work remotely at some point. And I think a lot of folks in healthcare go, no, all the treatment will still have to be on site, or you'll have to come to a hospital. Well, sure. I mean, for nurses, a lot of times that could be the case. But for a lot of other folks that work in healthcare, that may not. A lot of your healthcare management jobs may become remote at some point. In the finance and banking world, account management stuff, this again sort of very similar to sales out in the finance world, and even things like insurance and even some of the nonprofit worlds where you're managing clients and managing accounts, all can be done remotely. A lot of the project management work we're seeing, from everything from architecture and design to just some of these projects that go on in just about any type of work, as long as you can contact that team. Again, remote work. So customer service has been remote for years. We've seen Amazon really be the forefront Amazon was at the forefront of this years ago when they started putting remote customer service people working from their homes, with a laptop and a secure network and cell phone. So again, we want to make sure that if we're going into any of these industries, any of these workforce, these fields, we want to make sure that we're preparing for that. So we need to be preparing for the remote technology that all this involves, because you're not going to do most of this remote work without that technology. So for instance, phone and voicemail, yes, should have always been there. One of those normal things we should have always had. That should not go away. We should always have that ability to do those things. And probably most of us have mastered that for a long time, even though I find a lot of people still don't use voicemail either in either direction. So you often make calls but don't leave voicemails, or you don't check your voicemail. And so that's one of those things that's got to be a normal part of remote work, because you've got to stay visible and active in that team and with those clients. So, but now the things, that are so trendy are video meetings, and there's a million and one technologies you can use for that. These are scheduled or on demand. I mean, you can set up a Zoom call just like you can a telephone call and do it instantaneously. But we've been able to do that even with things like FaceTime on your iPhone for years, or Skype, some of those things. A lot of the collaborative management tools that are out there right now have been enhanced to make it easier for remote work teams to see what each other is doing on particular projects and track that and hold each other accountable on those. But things like email management, and what I mean here by email management, it's not just your individual email, but things like email marketing have drastically ramped up, because that's how so many customer bases are reached. And again, through that technology, you've got to manage your calendar. And one of the things about staying visible, one of the challenges we're seeing in remote work is that folks want to make sure their voice is still heard in the team, and that their productivity is being acknowledged, so that if I'm thriving in that remote environment, I don't want someone to think I'm just being lazy and staying at home. I want them to see my efforts. And all these project management and calendar management tools can help us do that. Companies are using productivity analytics to monitor a lot of this stuff. They're monitoring your online behavior. They were already doing that in a lot of corporate environments anyway. But when you think about the amount of technology and how many people we're tracking these days, even things like artificial intelligence and AI have helped us do that. So we want to be ready for these tools and expected to know that the culture is moving in that direction. When you think about this pre-pandemic, look how Skype was used. So for all these years, Skype has been sort of this first out front leader in remote meetings or face-to-face meetings over the internet, that kind of thing. And if you'll notice on this list, you don't see Zoom anywhere. So when you think about communication tools across the board that allow that to be easier, right now, we think of Zoom. Well, Skype was sort of in that forefront pre-pandemic, but look how quickly that changed. So this data was collected in late March of 2020, so right after the COVID shift. And look where Zoom immediately went from almost off the charts to the top of the charts because of COVID. And because of the fact that Zoom is extremely easy to use, and it sort of outdid and outperformed all these others. And it was also free. And when you think about that too, there's a difference in paying for this as a employer or using those free tools. So obviously we've got to be ready for those kind of technology pieces to prepare for those. So be ready, be practicing those things, get familiar with them. And again, if you need help with that, our office is always glad to help you. The remote experience can be challenging. For some folks, they love the idea. Other folks dread it. I mean, I hear story after story of folks who have been trapped at home during COVID with their small children trying to get their work done and having to be both babysitter and teacher, homeschool teacher, and doing their work as a professional from home has been really challenging. The remote experience is not for everybody, but you got to think about the environment, how that influences the actual experience. You've got to be able to be in control of that environment. And for remote work, the difference in working in a coffee shop and working in our home is you would think at home we would have more control, but not if you've got kids there who are stuck at home because of COVID and having to do their schoolwork at home, or another spouse that's working there, or pets, or all these other things. So those kind of things we can maybe work around, but some baseline things is we've got to have reliable and secure internet, Wi-Fi service, phone service, and internet service to be able to do this kind of work. And we've got to have the equipment we need. And we're seeing some remote companies provide that with no problem. We're also seeing some other remote companies asking people to provide their own, that they need to pay for their own Wi-Fi. They need to pay for their own phone service and their own secure network to be able to do this work from home. And that is a big shift that we've seen in certain companies, because they know if you're being paid a certain amount, you can probably afford this. And so they want you paying for that so that company doesn't have to. But many companies are still paying for some of those things for employees. And again, that might be something, if you're aspiring to this work or going into a remote position, you ask those questions during the interview process. When you think about the location itself, I mean, obviously working from anywhere sounds great. But we know that certain environments are not conducive to that. And I always joke about students trying to get a lot of work done in a very place like Tucker Student Center and down in front of the coffee shop where it's very loud and noisy. It's not a great space for that kind of work, or to listen to or participate in an online class. So think about your location and the control you have over that. You obviously want to eliminate distractions for productivity, but you want to have a comfortable space. And it needs to be a designated workspace. Some of the research that we're seeing where folks are having trouble sort of pulling away from their work at night or off hours time or just being able to find the work-life balance that they thrive in, not having a designated workspace is really a challenge for that. I mean, think about all those factors that influence that, but your schedule for that, the fact that some of you may thrive in an online environment because you don't, or a remote environment because you don't have to be physically present at 8 a.m. somewhere. Maybe your work schedule allows you to be flexible as part of that remote work too. But ultimately, your productivity is what's going to be on the line. That we want to make sure the work is done well, and obviously done with the effectiveness and the excellence that we would want to see in any environment, whether remote or face-to-face. Your conditions obviously influence that experience. I mean, things like your relationships with coworkers have changed and will continue to change. The way we communicate with teams and clients, this is all, I mean, you don't get the benefit of some of the face-to-face emotional interaction that sometimes helps us do our work well, engage customer interest, or the feelings of an employee or a supervisor over a particular issue. Even things like oversight and supervision, having these self-management skills to be able to work from home, to keep your productivity strong is essential for remote work. You've got to be able to continue to look collaborative and feel collaborative, even when there's not necessarily as much need for collaboration in that remote environment, or the ability to collaborate like you once did. You've got to be aware of your schedule and the schedule of your team, your clients, and all the other folks that you're interacting with through work who also may be working remotely. So again, not being able to physically see them like we once did changes some of that, and you've got to embrace the tools that allow us to do that. And for some of us, that's going to mean some new training, on the job training, those kind of things, using the specific tools that your company provides. But one of the biggest factors we're seeing that folks are struggling with is staying motivated during remote work because they don't have the social interaction that they used to really feed off of in the work environment that kept them energized, that made them really enjoy that work. Now, we've got also on the other spectrum, folks who are so glad they don't have to see that particular employee today that they always dread seeing, that team member that just takes the energy out of their day. But again, you've got to be a self-motivated, productive worker to thrive in this environment. Some of those soft skills that help us do that, obviously learning agility and adaptability. Since the software is changing so quickly, we need to be able to adapt to that and embrace that and use it as to our advantage. That when companies introduce new softwares, we're the ones pulling up on YouTube the video that shows us how to use it, or a new approach to how we're going to do project management, those kind of things. Being an agile learner and somebody who embraces that and adapts quickly keeps me marketable in the job world, but also keeps my value high for that particular company. As a remote worker, I need to be self-motivated. I need to be interdependent and rely on that team for sure, but I don't want to feel like I have to be micromanaged. And for me to have the ability to work remotely and my supervisor feel good about it, I've got to show those results, that I can prioritize and be proactive and still be extremely productive without the physical present oversight of that person. Just some general things too. Positive outlook helps there, and to be strategic about when we need to communicate and what we need to communicate about when we have a meeting and when we don't, all can really affect that mindset for both us and the folks that we work with on those teams. Obviously, on the tech side, we've got to make sure on the hard skills that we are tech savvy and are practicing these things. And when we have questions about them, that we figure out what to do with those. We've got to stay organized and also have some organizational awareness about what the other folks on our teams are doing and what they need from us during that, as we're going to remote workforce or transition into those things. That sometimes if we are entering a culture that's a company that we're not used to, a new opportunity, we've got to be acculturated to that organization, and understanding how we're to do our work within that. Empathetic collaboration is, again, knowing what my team needs from me, what my clients need from me, and what I need from them, and staying attuned to that without some of the benefits of that physical daily interaction that we might have. It is hard for a lot of folks in work-life balance right now, or in the remote world right now, to find that work-life balance and feel good about it. And so we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to design our work if we have the freedom to do that. I mean, most young people, most millennials today have really, really let the world know that they look at work-life balance as extremely important. And for many, they're even choosing fields that we would say that reflects the idea of passion over paycheck, that there's a lifestyle they're longing for that impacts the type of work they're choosing. And so we want to be very sensitive to that. If we're supervisors of young people, millennials in the workplace, but not just millennials, that if we're seeing an emotional change in a person, maybe a less communication, that we're checking in with our teams regularly, regardless of our place on that team, but just to check on each other to make sure that everyone's doing okay emotionally and staying motivated. Because again, the remote workforce, as we've transitioned to it so quickly during COVID, for some folks has really been a shock to the system, and we are seeing some mental health issues obviously around that. So here's some basic tips. If we want to thrive in this environment, here's some things to think about. And for some of us, you may think these are not the right things for me. I don't need those things. But for others of us, we do. We're seeing some neat information, some neat research around dressing for the workplace in the home. That obviously there's been all the jokes during the time of using Zoom now that folks show up with just their shirt and tie on, or a professional looking top half, and we have no idea what they're wearing, if they're wearing the pajama pants or not. But we want to dress for work in the office, even at home. And this doesn't have to mean that you wear a suit, but for some of us, you have to do this to stay motivated. It helps you keep that routine and start your day. And if you're not in completely remote work where it's hybridized and you're going in and out on your own, a lot of video calls, that sort of thing, you want to make sure you look professional, even if you're at home. We need to work an 8 to 5 day. And for most folks working remotely, that hasn't changed necessarily, but because you're working remotely, maybe you have the option to sleep in a little bit longer and work later in the day, or maybe pick that laptop up after the kids go to bed. But it's changing the routine, and you want to get back into the routine that works best for you. And for that's an 8 to 5 or a 9 to 6 or whatever. Even though you don't have the rhythm of the workplace to help you stay there, creating that routine is been proven to really help folks thrive in the remote environment. You've got to protect that schedule, and you've got to do that in such a way that helps you find the moments for that work-life balance to really be noticeable, that you're not working round the clock. And that has been an issue for a lot of folks as we've transitioned into remote work. Obviously, make time for physical exercise and self-care. Those are things that keep you energized, because you would be surprised at how many steps you get in an office environment that you don't get when you're at home working remotely from your apartment or your house, where you sit on the sofa all day or you stand at a stand-up desk. We've become such a culture of step counters, but you get a lot more physical exercise in a work environment with other people. So you've got to be very intentional about that when you are working remotely. It is such the culture now to create an interesting space, if not a great and effective space, for video meeting. We want to make sure that our video meetings are strong. This is not going away. I'm in an office today doing a video meeting with you. And again, our workspace, it needs to look professional. We need to look professional and know how to use those technologies. So make sure that you're practicing those things and establishing a great looking, at least on screen, space for those video meetings to happen. Chatting offline with coworkers is something you should be doing, making sure that you're still involving some non-work conversations with those coworkers that you used to get to see around the water cooler that you don't anymore, because you're working remotely, or maybe you're transitioning from the university life where you've had a lot of social life into a daily routine in a new remote position where you just don't have that social interaction. You've got to continue to develop those relationships. It's good for you. It's good for them. It's good for the team and for the output of your work. Keeping your voice in the team is so important, that we're finding that folks are having to be creative about how they speak up. When you're not physically in an office environment where you can just tell each other things all day long, or stick your head around into the other person's office, how do you keep your voice in the team? You have to be extremely intentional to make sure that your ideas are shared when you do have those video meetings or those phone calls, or that management tool that you're using to as a team look after those projects, that your voice, your input is being heard. It's really important too, because you're working from remotely, to look busy, to look productive. And I don't mean in a fake way, but just things like promptly replying to emails and voicemail are one way to do that. But another way to do that too is to keep asking for help and assistance, and offering help and assistance to the team. It's a two-way street when you can. That again shows your contributions, and people know you're not just checked out. Checking in regularly with your supervisor and with your team for feedback is really another way to do that, and to make sure that you're being keeping yourself on their radar as a productive and effective member of that team and that workforce. That helps them trust you during that time. So if you think just generally about what we need to succeed as remote workers, obviously there's things you can do. If you're going into this fresh and you've never worked remotely, or even if you're transitioning from the college environment into remote work, Obviously, experiment with your work setup at home and take some time to do this and pay attention to how you feel in that space, what seems to work well, what doesn't. Create some boundaries at home. That oftentimes means you and whoever you live with or inhabit that space with, you have separate workspaces where you don't hear each other's conversations, you're not overhearing each other's virtual meetings, that sort of thing. Preparing for meetings is huge. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're prepared. We've talked about that a lot today. But in the remote world, that's the opportunity you get to show your effectiveness and your productivity. So you want to make sure that you're doing that, holding yourself accountable to some of those behaviors, even things like taking some self-care and exercise times and taking an actual hour for lunch and having that lunch break. And we talked a lot about staying visible, and that's so important in the remote world, because if your contributions do not feel or are not felt by that team, they may start to doubt your worth on that team. And communication clearly and effectively is key for that. We already talked about working on your health, but setting up some clear responsibilities for yourself on a daily basis, including managing that routine, ties back into your health, but it also makes sure that you're managing those things well. And you've got clear expectations from your team and from your supervisor to do that. Taking time to socialize with that team as much as you can, either outside the work environment when you can hang out together in that favorite restaurant or that favorite activity, even if you're working remotely. Don't feel like life has to be remote just because work has become a remote thing. So if you've got questions for me, you can email those to us at career@gardner-webb.edu. I'd be happy to answer any of those for us. If we can help you at all prepare for remote work, this is, again, a new workshop for us. It's an ever-changing field. We'll continue to adapt this as we see remote work sort of take over a lot of the different industries and sectors we're working in. So if you've got questions for us, let us know. We appreciate you being here today.